But we have to learn about our communities first. We have to know what's important. And then, of course, our educators who have the knowledge of who their kids are and who those communities are, and having those conversations and saying, here's what we need. Here's what we can do. And it has been my experience that when those opportunities happen and they're honest conversations and go back and forth, the transformation starts to happen.
It's important to be part of a union because you have to have a voice.
Welcome to Union Talk. I'm Randi Weingarten.
Hi, everybody. This is Union Talk, and this is an episode I am so excited about. We're talking about community schools, something that I have been talking about for a long time on the national level, I think since 2008, and have been talking about and seeing locally, nationally, for as long as I've been involved in education. And this month, I've been crisscrossing the country, visiting and promoting these community schools. By the way, if you don't know by now, this is our 51st episode. So this is Randi Weingarten. I'm the president of the AFT. I figure I probably should have introduced myself first, but what the heck. Community schools. These are incredible public schools. They are both a place for learning and a place to meet the needs of our families and our communities. And they start as partnerships between educators and families and, of course, students and community members and other service providers to try to address the needs of kids and families in a way that helps them educationally. And you see in every different place where there's a community school, you see differences. There's like from services that I saw last month for immigrant and refugee families in Kansas City, Missouri, to financial literacy and adult education classes I saw in Cincinnati, to clothes closets, which a lot of community schools have, but with everything from winter coats to prom dresses that I just saw last month in Boston. And you're going to hear from two amazing educators who have been involved in community schools for a long time. I think sometimes age and experience have their sagaciousness. So I'm about to introduce two amazing people. But what I'm pointing out and what I'm really trying to express here is that these educators who I'm talking to today and the educators who are involved in community schools, they get what anyone in education knows, that when a kid comes to school, the kid comes with everything. All of the brilliance and all of the challenges. And for years and years and years, people would say, okay, just educate all of our kids. Yes, educators want to do that. But if we don't deal with everything else that's going on in a kid or a family's life, then what's going to happen? And so many people say, okay, well, that's somebody else's job. Yes, it would be good if it was somebody else's job, but that job hasn't gotten done. So what we've said is, okay, we're creating a real solution here. We're saying, let's wrap those services around schools. Let's actually try to meet a child and a family's needs and do it around schools and give us the money to do it and give us the services to do it. But this is where kids are and this is where families are, and schools are central to communities and central to neighborhoods. So give us the resources to get this done. And that's the real solution of community schools. Instead of saying, I'm pointing the fingers and saying it's somebody else's fault, somebody else has to do it. That's what we're trying to do. That is the point. And the two leaders I'm about to talk to, Dr. Sonya Lisa Romero-Autrey from New Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico. She's a community school research teacher at Hodkin Elementary School in Albuquerque. And Leslie Hugh, the community school coordinator at the San Francisco Unified School District. They know this and are as passionate about this as I am. And they both have served in these incredible roles as community school coordinators who can be paid, by the way, by Title I funds. But you need someone in a school that coordinates all of this. So today, we just really want to make this amazing strategy real to everybody who's listening to the podcast. But for those naysayers, let me just give you an economic statistic. I frankly like using the education statistics, like we're meeting kids' needs. But for those who are green eye shades people, community schools produce an average of a $7 to $15 return on investment for every dollar spent. You tell me a better anti-poverty strategy to overcoming barriers from student success than that. These schools work. We need the resources to do it. We need the wherewithal to do it. We need school systems and the powers that be in the bureaucracy of schools to understand that this takes time and resources, but it is really important to meet the social, emotional, economic, and other challenges that kids and families have if we want all kids to thrive. So, Sonya and Leslie, thank you for being with me. And I'm going to use a Rachel Maddow question or a comment. Did I get it right? Did I get it right?
You did.
Yes, absolutely.
I can't believe, frankly, that we know this works. We see examples all over the place, and we are still fighting an uphill battle to get sufficient funding for community schools. But you've both been in these specific roles where you've actually made community schools work. So you're actually builders of these programs. And so I just want both of you to talk about, for lack of a better word, an origin story, like how you got to these roles, what you're doing now, and what you've done in these roles, so that we paint a picture to somebody who may not know what a community school is and what it looks like and how it can be accomplished.
Well, first, thank you so much, Randi, for having me today. This is just the highlight of my day, and I love talking about the work that we're doing. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and community schools aren't really unique to New Mexico. They've actually been in our state almost 100 years. There was the Nambe Community Schools of 1937 that was really pinnacle in our state, and it's sort of been elevated throughout the years. And of course, we've done so much more work and research since then, but it's in our blood. It's in our communities and super important to us here in New Mexico. But my role specifically is one that was actually born from our IEL last year when we went to meet before the community conference. Let me just tell people what Sonya is talking about is there's a yearly conference of, I would say, the Coalition of the Willing, and that's done through IEL that we all descend upon, those of us who are involved in community schools. Thank you, Sonya. Thank you. So I was a kindergarten teacher for 25 years, but I've been very active in community schools, the strategy, the movement and such for many years through my work with the union, within the union. And as such, we went to the IEL and we started talking about what are some things that we're missing? What do we need to be doing a little bit better? And so we came up with the idea of having a community school resource teacher. And we have had community school coordinators, family liaisons for quite some time, but this was new. So we started building what this could look like. We were able to get significant federal grant within 3 schools. So it was a pipeline, essentially a middle school, a high school, and an elementary school. And we thought, what is it that we can do to really elevate educators' understanding of the community school strategy, and how can we bring that into the classroom? So then within that, we thought, okay, what is it what do we need to bring to this? We know that our community school coordinator supports the school, supports the teachers to meaningfully connect community school strategy to teaching and learning. And that role is super critical to the community schools. They've helped facilitate the stakeholder community council meetings and essential to keep the work moving forward. But how do we get into classrooms in a different way? So we created my role. It's the first one and only one in the district currently, which is exciting. We hope to continue that work. So we started to dream really, really big. And one of the things that we created was called a lead and learn. And in that lead and learn, we invited a bunch of educators who are community school teachers. And we said, what do you know about community schools? What does it look like? what would you like it to look like? What things are already happening? And we collected a significant amount of data from them. And when we said, okay, we see where some of the gaps are, and we created these fantastic modules, if you will, where these educators volunteer their time, they come in, they talk to us about what it is that they're seeing, what it could look like, and we help them and they help us create a focus within the school of how these strategies can be built within the system. So we're about to have our second course tomorrow. We have 25 amazing educators who are really teaching us what it is that they would like to see and what the systems currently are. And it just elevates the entire strategy of where we now need to make those connections within classroom instruction. So my role as a community school resource teacher is to provide professional development, to be able to support teachers with the community school strategy. But also within the pipeline that I'm working on is how we are helping teachers identify the why and sort of that mind shift of collaborating with the stakeholders, the students, the families, the school staff, to create conditions that allow for collaboration that result in, culturally sustaining classrooms, instruction, and practice. So that's currently where we're at, and where my role is at within Albuquerque Public Schools and the union.
Before we get to Leslie, I want to put a pin in what I also hear you saying, Sonya, is that Albuquerque has gotten one of the federal community school grants, and I hear there's now a commitment in terms of Albuquerque to create this sustainability. And I hear because many of us, we tried on the local level to get these community coordinators at a school to also help with the accordion of services that were needed, and to make sure that this was not on, if I was teaching AP Gov or teaching, that it was not on my shoulders on top of everything else I was doing, that having a separate community school coordinator is really important. But what I'm hearing you say in terms of your new role is that Albuquerque is going to the next step on sustainability and on creating, not just in one school, but in the entire school district, a sense of the why and the importance of this. And to have 25 educators coming in and doing this kind of work together, it creates that seed of scale and that seed of sustenance. So did I get that right or no?
You absolutely did. And the idea is within those 25 teachers to create then leaders within their schools.
Exactly.
And the work continues. And specific to my work is because I work within the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school, is bridging those gaps from the transition grades to keep this pipeline really, really strong. And then
fantastic.
That model to other community schools and other pipelines. So it's innovative work and super exciting. We're learning a lot, but it's been tremendous, the outcome so far.
It's so fantastic, Sonya. Thank you. And Leslie, I'm in San Francisco today. I'm about to go to visit some community schools in San Francisco, but Leslie has been literally at, doing this work. And so tell us, before I steal your line here, tell us about what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Randi, for having me on here. I think, one of the things that, I would agree with everything that you said in your opening. What I would push back on, though, is that the community schools is not a program. It's a fundamental shift on how we do school, right? Yeah. So it's about change. It's a paradigm shift on how we think about doing school and how we do school itself, right? And so I think for me I started my career as a school social worker, and I loved it. I loved really kind of supporting the social emotional needs of our young people. However, it wasn't fundamentally shifting the educational experience of our students, right? And so I heard about community schools, and then I became a community school coordinator, and I was in that role for 7 years before transitioning into a full-time role at United Educators of San Francisco. And now my job as a coach, I've been doing this for 2 years, where I am helping scale up community schools in San Francisco. And so one of the things that I really learned on the ground of doing this is actually learning how, when we are aligned in our vision of what we want with our young people, right? And there's no part of this conversation where it's for, it's with. And I think that is the fundamental difference between a community school and a non-community school, is that we are creating spaces for our young people, for our families, to actually step into their own power and drive change. We know that our young people know exactly what they need to thrive and grow, but our system isn't set up to really listen to them and then act upon it. We also know that families are our best advocates. They know their children inside and out. In the way that an educator does that, we know them for, in my case, I was at a middle school for 3 years, and then that's it, right? And so how do we fundamentally rethink and reimagine our relationships with one another so that those voices are centered, so that we can actually accomplish what we all are aligned to do, which is that we want our young people to be thriving. We want our families to be able to support them. We want our families to also be healthy and thriving as well. And so community schools provides a venue to fundamentally make people's lives better, right? It is actually a venue for that, right? Community schools is a way to make people's lives better in ways that we've never imagined, which is why I'm really excited that the federal government is like catching on, right? Like that, even a few years ago, the federal funding for community schools tripled. And I know that is in large part because of the AFT support around that. But I do think that like the federal government, I'm in California, and California obviously did kind of realize that this was a pathway to go. But how do we, actually really start to share the stories that are happening on the ground so that we can have a deeper understanding of what's actually happening?
So, Leslie, I am going to take this line, venue for fundamentally making lives better. I know that there are people who are watching and listening. I will credit you every time I can credit you, but you may hear that line in my convention speech this year.
Awesome.
I think that's right. It is. And I completely agree with you. These are fundamental and transformational shifts that we are making. And our whole push in terms of the Real Solutions program of literacy, community schools, experiential learning is we are going for the fundamental shift to actually do what we say we're supposed to do is how do we prepare kids for life, for career, for college, for civic engagement? And what is it that they need to know and be able to do? And these are the kind of shifts we need to do. So I think you're spot on. The question is, for those who don't see it, and Leslie, you said this, when people hear educators talk about with kids, not for kids, they still see education as we are pouring it in like, a jar, and we're going to just pour, knowledge into somebody's brain. That is not the way kids work. That's not the way we work. So the agency that you're talking about, the empowerment, how are kids going to become critical thinkers unless they are empowered and have agency? How are families going to trust that government can work unless they feel involved and engaged? So why don't both of you just kind of give an example of something in San Francisco and something in Albuquerque so that people can see it? And just an example of one of the things that you love that we're doing, instead of me throwing out, I threw out some examples beforehand, the immigration work in Kansas City, because that was just, nobody would have known that. The financial literacy work in Cincinnati, it was interesting. We were just in Chicago as well at Collins Academy. Sorry, they call it the Collins Academy. That, the new mayor, who's a teacher, school teacher, Brandon Johnson, they are trying to go from 20 to 200 community schools. And when the mayor said to, and Collins is a community school, but said to the young adults there, what do you want? What do you need? And they were talking about pathways to jobs. And they were also talking about, one of the kids got up and said, look, we want some street law classes. We want to make sure that we understand what's going on. And so that dynamic, that way, all of a sudden, it was like, okay, there was a forum for kids to tell the mayor what they needed. And in the context of a community school, we're going to figure out how to make that happen for kids and their families. So give us a couple of examples of what you've been working on just so that people see it. We'll start with Leslie first this time.
Thank you, Randy. So this whole podcast recording is so hard because normally normal conversation, I'm just like reading body language. So thank you, Randy, for directing. So I think there's a couple of different examples. I have an example
I
of
only
how
get it
young
now, Leslie, because this is my 51st one.
Yeah, see, your experience. I'm like, what? Huh? I don't get it. I think in community schools, one of the experiences I had when I was at a school called Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Academic Middle School. It's a public middle school serving 6th through 8th grades in San Francisco. And one of the things that we did pretty much almost immediately after becoming a community school was we were really intentional about youth voice and youth agency. And so we did a couple of two very strategic things. We made youth voice and youth agency one of our North Stars. So we had 4 North Stars. One of us was like rigorous learning, instruction. A second one is increasing sense of belonging. The third one was whole child. And the fourth one was youth agency. And so as part of that North Star that we were aiming towards, we implemented project-based learning, which is another, people call it different things, experiential learning, project-based learning. And the reason why project-based learning was really critical for us was because it was focused on what problems that young people wanted to solve in their communities. So if they wanted to solve, a housing, if they wanted to solve, trash in their communities, whatever it was that they were like really passionate about, educators designed a project based on that, right? It was connected to the real world, connected to their community. It was differentiated so that different types of learners could access this. And what happened was that they produced projects, things like they would use all of these principles to design a tent that could conduce the most heat so that people weren't cold while living on the streets. And so these were the kind of things that when you center young people in their passions, in their interests, it can actually really drive deep learning. So it was always standards aligned. So all of these things, this is sort of ed jargon, but this is where young people...
And I bet young people came to school.
So we saw our academic scores skyrocket. We got a 90% decrease in suspensions, a 90% decrease in office disciplinary referrals. We outpaced the district by double digits in sort of academic learning in that same short period of time that I was there. And so we were able to do all those things under the strategy of community schools, which project-based learning was just like a very natural fit because it aligned to the values of community schools, right? And, another example that we had in San Francisco that's really emerging right now is in San Francisco, we're really struggling. If you ask any San Franciscan what the number one issue that we're really struggling with as a city is, it's housing. Right? That we have an incredible gap. We have an affordability crisis. We have a housing crisis. The sustainability of being able to afford to live here is extremely high, which is something that as educators, we talk about on the daily. But what we don't talk as much is that this young people that we serve are also facing this too.
Yep.
And so we have had this ongoing for several years, but guess what? We have several community schools who are actively trying to disrupt the system of housing in order to serve their young people and families so that they can show up to school ready to learn. And so we have several schools who have taken this on, right? We have Buena Vista Horace Mann K-8, who has opened the only shelter that we know of for unhoused students and families of San Francisco Unified School District in the country on campus. And they did it through the community school strategy.
Leslie, say that again, just to make sure that people hear it.
Yes.
I know this is a school I'm seeing today, but say that again.
Sounds good. So Buena Vista Horace Mann K-8 in San Francisco is operating for what we understand the only shelter for unhoused students and families on a school campus in the country. And they did this through the community school strategy. They listened and built very caring, trusting relationships with their families. Their families trusted them and in turn told them, we don't know where we're going to sleep tonight. We don't know where we're going to sleep tomorrow. And so what the parents did was they drove the solutions. They worked the solution and they trusted the staff to be able to push this as a solution. And so they built relationships with city leaders. And they were able to open the shelter in 2017. It has been continuously running, and they have had incredible success in terms of the number of families, A, they're getting off the street. And two, the number of families that have gone on to stable housing has been astronomical and outpacing every other shelter in San Francisco.
Amazing.
And so they are actively disrupting the system in which we are all living in by doing that. And that fight has continued, not just with the shelter, but just a couple of weeks ago, the families at Mission Education Center, at a couple of different schools, what they've been able to do is center their lived experiences to drive change. And they were able to convince the mayor and other city leaders to open a new family shelter within the last couple of weeks through the community school strategy.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Amazing. That's community schools.
100%.
But also with the agency that you were talking about, with how you have families and educators being problem solvers and driving solutions, bottom up, and then seeing the data that shows the solutions work and using that to try to scale and sustain.
And it's not just about the housing, which, schools aren't built necessarily for that. But at these same schools, because they're doing these strategies really well, since the pandemic, guess what also these two schools are doing really well? Attendance. Students are coming to school every single day and learning. They're doing a really great job of building relationships and problem solving so that kids are coming to school regularly to learn. And you'll see that these schools in particular have done a really amazing job at the attendance, at problem solving the issues that are getting in the way of young people coming to school every day.
Yep. And I love your term disruptive. So, Sonya, I think one of the things we all remember is that you had this appearance years back on the Ellen Show while you were at Wallace. People were so shocked at that moment that schools would bathe kids and help with life essentials and help kids eat. I mean, think about now, we have all these states who we are advocating to have universal meals. But at that time, and I know I am aging all of us, it was like, oh my God, schools are feeding kids. Ellen was just like, oh my God, look what's happening. But you think about what Leslie just said, and going back to even years and years ago, how shocking it was to the public that, yes, of course we're doing that. But why don't you also, what kind of things can we just say to our podcast audience so that they can see it? They just saw Leslie talk about a shelter at a school, which is actually now a pivotal leverage point to help families get more housing and to help kids be at school more. And so see if you can also think about one of the ideas that you've done. You've done so many, and it's so hard to share. So share a story.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And Leslie, oh my goodness, it's fantastic to hear the work that you all are doing. I want to talk to you a little bit more because that's some of the things that some of the educators shared that they really wanted to have within their schools. So we'll have to catch up. But yes, I was on Ellen several years ago, almost 10 years ago. And it was because I had foster kids. They were my students. And it was supposed to be a 2-day placement, and then it ended up being almost 4 years. But what we learned from that, and some of the things that came from that, was we got a lovely check from Ellen DeGeneres for our school. And we thought, oh my goodness, what do we do with this? We want to do something meaningful. And let me preface this by saying that what I did, as far as the kids are concerned, is not unique to what educators do. All teachers feed their students. All teachers check on their children to make sure they're okay and do their best to work with families and such. For whatever reason, my story happened to be highlighted, but I don't feel that it's unique to the work that educators across the country do every single day in every classroom. So I just wanted to say that. But I think what grew out of that opportunity for us at our school at Lew Wallace Elementary downtown was we got a check. We got a check for $10,000. And that's a lot of money, but what are we going to do with it that is sustainable? So we collaborated with partners, faith-based partners, politicians, families, businesses across downtown New Mexico. And we did a survey and we realized food. Food is a big issue for us. Downtown Albuquerque is a food desert. There's one grocery store. That's it. And multiple schools. So we thought, okay, what do we do? So we started thinking, okay, food. We started really, really small with some food baskets every Friday to as many families as we could. And we realized, okay, we need this to be something that's sustainable. So then we started looking for grants or opportunities again through this community school strategy of collective voice and trying to create environments that was also dignified for our families. And then we thought, okay, and a lot of the families said, we don't have access to fruits and vegetables. So we partnered with different entities and we started to bring in some fruits and vegetables. And then we realized we need to really expand this to some of the other schools in downtown New Mexico, or downtown Albuquerque, rather. And so we thought, what if we did something like a grocery store? Really make it like a grocery store so families can come in and get enough food to sustain. And how can we make this as big as possible? So through this community school strategy of partnerships and conversations, utilizing all of our coordinators, we were able to create a grocery store that we would set up in a gym. And initially it was just at our school at Lew Wallace. Families would come in with a grocery cart. We'd have baggers. We'd help them take out the food. And it could be any family. There was no requirement. And then we thought, we can't just be servicing our schools. We need to be servicing all the public schools downtown. So now, 10 years later, we still do this. It shifts different schools. We service the middle schools, the high schools, and such. And we still have a grocery store where parents come in, families come in, students come in, and there's enough food that they can make 26 meals until the next grocery store. Yes, with fresh fruits, fresh vegetables from local growers. We've got beautiful produce. We've got dairy. We've got meat. It's amazing. And so for us, when we did our data collection and research, it was the food insecurities that we really, really needed to address. And of course, that invited families into the school. And we really tried to make it very dignified. So along with, like I said, a grocery cart and volunteers that would take out the bags and help bagging, we realized that attendance increased. We realized that parent participation increased. We realized that our community partners were more engaged with what was happening in schools, asking more questions. What can we do? Our educators already knew what the issues were. And now there was a solution, if you will, not the only thing, but one of the things. And then from there, we could have more meaningful conversations to realize some of the other things that we needed within the schools that has just continually built. So from that one opportunity, here we are almost 10 years later, still doing the work, and it has just exponentially grown, among other things that we're doing within all of the other community schools. But that's my specific story to our school in downtown.
My God.
Yeah.
So for those who are listening, dealing with housing insecurity, dealing with food insecurity, dealing with all of the emotional and social issues. Like we have fought, and the Biden administration through the rescue plan gave us money for guidance counselors and social workers. But these two units, the Albuquerque Union and the San Francisco Union, have fought to get these positions in their contracts so that they don't go up and down dependent upon the vicissitudes of who's the president of the United States. We know these things are important, but doing it through a community school model. Both Leslie and Sonya talked about how we can address these needs through this community school model of partnerships and coordination at the school level, and then sustain it and scale it at a district level. So I'm going to ask you two last questions. I always ask when I have, or I try to always ask, I don't always ask, but I try to always ask, which teacher in your own life had the biggest impact on you? And as we're getting to Teacher Appreciation Month, I want to make sure that I ask that as the last question. But hopefully there are people who, after they listen to this podcast, say, okay, I want in. How do I do this? So both of you, give us your best advice on the best first step to take. And so start with Sonya and then Leslie.
Well, I think it's really important for schools, districts, educators, parents, families to learn as much as you can about the history and the current state of community schools in the community and really start talking about that. Because if you don't know where to begin, and obviously this is driven, I believe, from the school initially to really reach out to parents so that parents feel like they have a voice in their children's education and in those opportunities, because they are the experts on their children as well and in their communities. And then when we partner together, the growth that can happen is significant, but we have to learn about our communities first. We have to know what's important. And then, of course, our educators who have the knowledge of who their kids are and who those communities are and having those conversations and saying, here's what we need. Here's what we can do. And it has been my experience that when those opportunities happen and they're honest conversations and go back and forth, the transformation starts to happen. And then you see this like, oh my goodness, we can do this. This is possible. If I have this piece, I have this piece, we bring it all together. Now we can build something that is sustainable. And then you start to see the outcomes with the students, with the families, with educator well-being, all of the things. That community school strategy really is the plate, if you will, of all the things we put in education. If we can continue the work and really, as you said, visualize, see, communicate with each other what is needed. It's doable.
Thank you, Sonya. Leslie.
Okay, so before I answer that question, I want to do another kind of example of how community schools actually, like if we partner and reimagine the relationships that we build with each other, success can happen. One of which is in San Francisco, a coalition of folks, parents, young people, community partners, the educators union, came together to actually realize that community schools was the way to go. And so after we realized that, what does that actually mean? We were able to put on the ballot measure in November of 2022, we put on the ballot a measure that would allocate up to $60 million annually to community schools in San Francisco. And that is a celebration of the partnerships. When we partner with one another really intentionally, then we can actually bring the resources to make this happen, to make it sustainable.
And you put it on the ballot, and then what happened?
And we put it on the ballot, and now it's starting to come to fruition, right? Like
and it passed, right?
Yeah. Sorry. sorry. I was jumping, right? Yes. So it passed.
I didn't want you to bury the lead.
Yes. It passed by overwhelming majority. It was 76% of voters voted yes on this ballot measure. And so it wasn't just a recognition. And, San Francisco voters really recognized that this was something that we needed to invest in, right? And so I think that's another example of how, like, when we come together to unite for our young people, really amazing things can happen. In terms of your original question, Randi, I think the first things is like anybody who's listening to this podcast, I think a very basic, start Googling some articles, start finding out some more information. But I would say the most meaningful first step is to talk to other people in your community, whether it's your school, if you're an educator in your school community, if you're a parent of a young person, that school community. But also, one of the great things is that the two largest educator unions in the country are deeply invested. This is a priority, which means that in every single state, there is a group of people who are really committed to this, right? And so we can talk to one another about, okay, let's talk and let's figure this out together. And so I do think that there is an opportunity for us to start the conversations in the community that you're in, to start the conversation. And there's a lot of tools out there and a lot of people that you can connect with to learn more information and to try and advance community schools in your community.
Great. So I'll say this again when I end, but for anybody who wants to know about some of those tools, just go to aft.org/community-schools, aft.org/community-schools, and you'll get some of the tools. You won't get the love that we've had today with Leslie and Sonya, but you'll get some of the tools in terms of that. So, okay, what teacher in both of your lives, you're both incredible educators. I love, Leslie, that you started as a social worker and Sonya as a kindergarten teacher, right? Kindergarten? So which teacher in your life has had the biggest impact on you?
Oh, gosh, so many. But the one that comes to mind is, her name is Anne-Marie Strangio. She was a teacher for many, many years and then became an administrator. And probably the biggest thing that I learned from her was build relationships. When you get to know your kids and you get to know your communities, anything is possible because they will teach you. They will fill you and you will eventually fill them. But if you don't build those relationships with them, what is the goal? What is the point? Why are you here? And there was many times throughout my career that I would call her and I would say, I can't do this. She says, put it away, build relationships, get to know your kids. When you do that, the rest is going to make sense. And then when she became an administrator, as my principal, she gave us permission, which is hard to do sometimes when you have all of the pressures of, I got to test, I got to meet this, I got to check this. And she said, I was a teacher first. We know what matters. We know that growing with kids, getting to know our families is critical to the work that we do, so that they're never going to remember this lesson, but they're going to remember how you made them feel. Keep that with you at all times. And so that has always stuck with me through the years. So I'm extremely grateful for her. And of course, I have many, but they were not going to remember those things. They're going to remember how you made them feel, make them feel loved, make them feel welcome, make them feel heard, make them feel they are absolutely critical to the future of the world. And they will see themselves as you see them. And so, yes, she's always been my inspiration, among many.
Fantastic. Leslie.
I agree with how they make me feel. So I think the educator that really had the biggest impact on me was Peter Yan. He was the vice principal of my high school, but actually he was the coach. I was on the volleyball team and he was my coach. But most importantly, he was the first person outside of my family that I felt believed in me. And unfortunately, he passed away very tragically right after I graduated. But he was the first. He was the first person that made me feel like I could soar. And he was very intentional about that, obviously. It is a lasting impact when an educator believes in you, when someone believes in you. And so I think about him all the time and the tremendous impact. I probably wouldn't have been in public education if he didn't believe in me. So it was really impactful for me.
It is, as we get to Teacher Appreciation Week and month and Nurse Appreciation Month, it's like every one of the people we represent, the month where we appreciate them is May, which is,
the end of the school year.
Exactly, which we really need this year.
Yes.
But I would just say, I think both of you now see why I love doing these podcasts. When we started them a couple of years ago, we said, let's do 2 a month. But unlike others who are in the media, who do this all the time, my goal was to actually lift up the stories of our members and lift up what's going on in schools and pull the curtain back so that people could see who our members are and what public schools do and the kind of strategies we know would work to help kids soar, to help create opportunity, agency, empowerment, freedom, justice, all the things that are supposed to be what happens in a democracy. And I would just say, Sonya and Leslie, I'm so grateful to you and so grateful for the work that you do. And look what we've done in this last 45 minutes. We've shown a lot of people what community schools are and what that means, as you said earlier, Leslie, and I quote you, a venue for fundamentally making lives better. And that's what the two of you do. And that's what our membership does. And that's what this community school model does. And it is a fundamental shift that we as a union are trying to make for Americans and for our kids and for our country. And so I just really appreciate both of you. And I really appreciate the love that you shared about the work of community schools. I mean, think about it. Shelter, grocery store, fostering kids, ballot initiatives. We got all of it in today. So I just want to say how grateful I am. And for those who are listening who want to learn more, I think the advice that Leslie and Sonya gave about start by talking to people, start by building relationships, start by creating a community that says this is important to do. Start by having some togetherness here so that there's a group of people that say this is important. But if you want the specific tools about how do you have a community person at a school and how do you use Title I to fund it or other types of things to do, you can go to aft.org/communities-schools for articles, guides, and more. And I just want to say one more time, thank you to both of you so much. And to those of you who are listening, this is Union Talk, talking about a transformational strategy for helping our kids, our families, and our communities. That's what community schools are. Thank you. See you next time.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Union Talk. Remember to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast and tune in every other week for a new episode. Thank you, be safe, and be well.